So if we're to accelerate our growth journey, our integrated faith business journey, which means accelerating our spiritual growth and accelerating our business growth, then we're going to want to have that roadmap. Because I don't know about you and your business, but in mine, there were times I misstepped. I made wrong decisions. I had wrong concepts. Sometimes I took a path that ended in a dead end. It didn't get me to where I wanted to go. For the biggest part, for the first 10 years, I didn't even know what it looked like. I didn't even have a pattern for how you grew a business. And I certainly didn't consider how I was to grow in my own faith. I don't know if you guys have experienced that. But our objective is to accelerate our growth, to experience more. And faith, as we talked about last month, is what unlocks God's more. This is an incredibly powerful concept and an inspiring, purpose for us. Is the more that we actually apply our faith, the more we grow in faith, the more we implement that throughout our organization, that others within the organization themselves become empowered by faith. The business itself, without us, starts to flow underneath the influence of God himself. And how much more powerful would our business be if it wasn't just Luke that was praying and seeking God, but the people who worked with Luke side by side were also doing that they themselves were under the influence of God. How much more easy or beneficial would it be to the primary leader if you weren't the only one that were doing that? So since faith unlocks God's more, God has a great plan for us. He has a great plan for our business, right? So we want to get into the flow and connect with that, don't we? I do. That's what I think God has a plan, a special plan for Christian business leaders, because that's what you do. That's why you're so powerful in his kingdom, is you connect with God's plan. Remember, God's more includes over 7,000 promises contained in the Bible. It includes more of his presence, more of his favor, more of his blessings, more fulfillment of our purpose. What could be better than unlocking God's more? I had an experience when I first started to understand this in my business. It was after we were emerging from our desert experience where we lost everything, some of what I talked about last month. And we were now emerging and growing. And so I hired a Christian salesperson who had a great degree of experience and faith. And he taught me a lot about how to pray intentionally over business. But we had a problem. The problem was that we weren't selling anything, that there was no fruit that was coming forth. And so after well over a year of communicating and trying to come up with a plan to actually start to get back to where we were and selling and doing well, we came to a difference of opinion. While this person was very faithful and very mature in his faith, what he was doing all day was praying. And he wasn't acting. And despite requests for him to be more intentional with his activities, he wouldn't do so. Because in his mind, it was faith. And in my mind, it was faith plus works. Ultimately, it was a very difficult decision. I ended up having a panic attack. And I've never had a panic attack. Never had one since. That I ended up, after a meeting, driving myself to the urgent care and feeling I was having a heart attack. In the urgent care, of course, they recognized that and did the tests and everything and found it was a panic attack. But why did I have a panic attack? The reason I had the panic attack, as I realize it, is that it was FOMO. You're familiar with FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. I knew in my spirit that if we did not integrate faith with works, that me and the business were going to miss out. What about you? Do you have a fear of missing out? God has so much more for us. So how do we integrate spiritual leadership in business growth so we don't miss out on what God has for us? Have you considered the desired growth patterns? So if we're going to think about it, how do we grow? Well, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? As we raise our children, we don't have to have them reinvent the wheel. You don't have to touch something that's hot to realize not to touch something that's hot. So part of how we succeed and accelerate our journey is identifying the growth patterns we want to follow. There's a spiritual growth pattern that's laid out through Scripture, comprehensive. There are leadership growth patterns that exist. There are business mastery growth patterns that you can tie into. And there's certainly business growth stages that every business follows. There are 5 stages that every business will follow, and they'll even go back and come back again and follow those stages. If you want to accelerate your journey, don't reinvent the wheel. Let's identify the growth patterns that we want to follow. So what do we need? We need a framework, as I talked about last time. We need a framework that overlays these areas. I mean, think about it, is that we're dealing with our own spiritual growth and the spiritual growth of our people. Because do you want your peoples to grow in their spiritual walk? I mean, that is evangelism, right? Isn't that discipleship? We have leadership. In order for our business to grow to the next level, leaders have to make more leaders. So we need our people to grow in their leadership, and we ourselves need to grow in our leadership so that we can take the business further. A business will only go as far as its leadership will take it. Sometimes if your business is stuck, it's because your leadership is stuck. Business mastery. We should master everything that God gives us to do. If you're a star football player, then you should master being the star football player or a pitcher. That means getting out onto the field and mastering and getting excellent and better at what you do. Why wouldn't that also be true for you in business? We need to grow in our expertise in business, in our industry, in our ability to lead, in understanding the business itself and how business works. So we need to overlap these then with the stages of business. That's complex, right? So we need a complex tool that allows us to look at it in our own way. The book I write helps you identify these growth patterns, but you can identify your own growth patterns if you want, and I encourage you to do so. So this framework helps you assess where you are now. Because any good journey starts with, where am I on that map? Used to be the mall where they had "you're here." I don't know if those things exist anymore. It's a mall. Yeah, right. But Google Maps says you're right here. Hey, that's better. Google Maps says you're right here. And then you hit where you want to go, and it shows you the way. So the roadmap in the diagram shows us, shows us where we are, where we want to go. It then allows you to focus on the action plan to get there. What we talked about is integrating with faith goes through basically 3 growth horizons, and we discussed in detail growth horizons last month. And we talked about this diagram, but I'm sharing it for those who haven't. This is the first stage, the first level of growth in a business and in our own lives is the survival growth level. And as you can see, it's got some ups and downs in it. If we make it through survival, which is the first horizon, and we're going to talk in detail more about what compromises or what is in the first horizon, then we come to the level of success. and it has less ups and downs, but still in our vision here of it being a mountain, it's like going through the trees like we talked about last month. You know, you're busy going through the trees, but you can't necessarily see above the forest. So you got to make sure you're following that roadmap so you don't get lost. And success as a second horizon has its own attributes in those areas. If you're lucky, and if actually you're intentional and you plan well and you align with God's plans, there's the scaling phase. And the scaling is the multiplication of your business, it's the profitability, but it's also the multiplication of the more of God, which is ultimately our objective. And everything that Jesus talks about in the kingdom, like we talked about last month, is about multiplication. And God's desire for us is to multiply what he's given us, not just a straight line increase, but he expects and desires for us to multiply so that when I disciple one person, that person then disciples 5 and then 20 and then 100. Same way with our business. Scaling is the objective. So how do we do that is the key. What we talked about, and I'll share now, is the integrated faith framework. We need a framework for overlapping what we do. And that's what the book does. It provides a framework that allows you to consider, where am I now? Where do I want to go? And how do I get there? In an intentional way. It identifies that on the left-hand side is spiritual growth. On the horizontal axis is our growth in business mastery and leadership development. We have to grow in all three in an integrated faith business. Remember what we said, a successful business is one that grows and advances in leadership and business mastery. If you're a Christian, you have to also grow in your faith and how you apply faith. So that's what this graphic represents. So how do we grow spiritually? Well, from a discipleship standpoint, many of us start as a follower, and then we're to grow into a disciple. But Jesus never intended for us just to stay as a disciple. As a Christian business leader, you're called to be a leader. Many get stuck at being a follower because they don't have a plan. They don't see a roadmap. They don't understand the importance of Christian business leadership and why they need to grow and how they grow. So we got spiritual growth on 3 levels. We have business and mastery and leadership development on 3 levels, which aren't directly, shown here, but that's part of the plan. And we're going to start to look into the details of that. And then ultimately, we have the 5 stages of business growth. So we have business on the horizontal. So interestingly enough, the 5 stages of business growth that every business goes through starts with startup, and then you get into surviving. Truthfully, I think only 20% of businesses get beyond surviving. 80% fail in the first 5 years. But if you are successful, then you get into this success stage, and it's a continuous success stage. If you have a little success and then you fall back, you really don't qualify for a continuous success stage. The key is to be in continuous growth and success. And once we're there, and there's a roadmap or a process that allows us to assess how we get there, how we stay there, how we grow, ultimately, the growth from continuous success is to then mature the business, mature the processes, mature the systems, mature the leadership, mature your people, so that ultimately, if you have this maturity and consistency in place, you can scale. And then there's a process of scaling. I'm not the only one who teaches the 5 stages of business. This is a well-known understanding, well-known methodology. It's taught by many business consultants. Maybe you've seen it. Dave Ramsey teaches on it. This is fundamental for growing your business. What is different is what I share is how do you overlap your business, your spiritual growth with your business growth in leadership and mastery? And what's the result? What's the outcome? Well, the outcome is that, as we see on the green line, the business grows. But that line could also represent your spiritual growth and the spiritual growth of everyone that's in your leadership. So the framework is a progressive growth planning tool that intentionally integrates faith into business at every level of growth, that overlays personal development with business expansion. It allows us to develop and reach our full potential, resulting in meaningful, transformative change. Again, I can think about things, I can think about faith, but if I don't intentionally act on it, what has it changed? What transformation has it brought? How has it advanced the kingdom of God? How has it transformed people's lives in the stakeholder groups that I influence with?